Hi, and welcome to the Learning Geeks. Are you ready for a topic that nobody is talking about and we've never discussed before? Like AI and learning? Of course, we've talked about it a lot, but you know what? There's always more to talk about. And we're going to talk about it today with Julia Stiglitz from Uplimit on this episode of the Learning Geeks podcast, starting now. Hey, everybody. Welcome.
Hello.
Welcome. So yeah, we'll talk about AI and learning, but before we do that, are you guys up to date on the latest Star Wars news?
You know, it changes every day, so
It does.
I'm sure the answer is no.
No.
Because as soon as I think I'm up to date, they say, no, this is not happening. Oh, but this is happening.
Well,
So what's the latest, Bob?
well, you know, if you're feeling a little behind, you should listen to the Star Wars Cleaning Crew podcast.
I thought you were going to rename that.
I'm gonna rename it. We're still workshopping the new names, but for now
Okay.
you can find it under Star Wars Cleaning Crew. So on the
Are we
Star
going
Wars
to be
Cleaning
a permanent advertisement for your own podcast now, your
Yeah.
own side podcast?
If so,
Yeah.
Jake, I think we need to start charging a little bit of money for the advertising.
Crew,
think so.
exactly.
This is sponsored by Bob's podcast.
Well, you know what? You guys can have 99% of the revenue I'm currently making from the Star Wars Cleaning Crew and balance it with the 100% of the revenue that we're making from the Learning Geeks podcast.
So everything is in the red.
So we're still in debt.
We're still in debt.
Yes.
But no, you know what? I'm excited. We're recording this end of November. I'm getting more and more psyched for this new Skeleton Crew show coming out. I think it's going to be really fun. And this last week, they released some interesting like roundtable discussions of the different directors. So that's fun to tune into. So I'm cautiously optimistic about that.
Yeah, I saw some of the trailer for it. Looks pretty good.
Yeah.
I'm hoping that it's a little nostalgia and feels like the Goonies of the of this era.
Exactly.
That's my
Exactly.
hope.
Star Wars Goonies.
In
I'm all
space.
for it.
Hey, let's go ahead and without any further ado, bring in our guests. So, Jake, I believe you have the honors today of introducing Julia.
I do. So Julia's here today. She is a CEO and co-founder of Uplimit. And Uplimit's an EdTech platform that uses AI and social connections to educate and develop skills. So Julia brings a wealth of experience from her roles in leadership and innovation. She was a partner at GSV Ventures. She supported early stage companies in education and the future of work. She played a pivotal role at Coursera, where she was one of the first leadership hires and helped grow the platform to over 40 million learners. She began her career as a teacher with Teach for America and has worked across various educational initiatives and boards, including Google Apps for Education, Outlier.org, and many others. So, Julia, you have a ton of experience in the education world, learning world, and I would say you are pretty much a learning geek. So, happy to have you on.
Welcome to the
Thank you
Geek
so
Dome.
much. I would proudly call myself a learning geek. So thank you so much for having me on this podcast.
I feel so unexperienced after that intro.
I know.
So, Julia, why don't you share? Let's talk first about Uplimit. Why don't you just share about Uplimit, your role there, and give a little bit of a background onto that space before we kind of jump into the main topic.
Sure. So I'm the CEO and co-founder of Uplimit. We founded Uplimit about 3 years ago. Myself and my two co-founders, we all were early Coursera employees, and really saw this disconnect between what really good teaching and learning looks like, which is interactive and inspiring and engaging, and what the sort of previous generation had come out with, which was amazing content from incredible individuals, but really lacked that sort of interactivity engagement that we knew to be so important. And so it was during the pandemic, and this was when like Zoom schools were all over the news, and I started kept on thinking like, this can't be it. Like, this can't be the state of EdTech. Like, we have to be able to do something better. And the big thing that was changing was the role that AI could potentially play. So I actually convinced my husband during the pandemic, as one does during the pandemic, convinced my husband to like be the instructor for the very first class that we had on Uplimit, and started building it out. Brought in my co-founders, one both from early Coursera, one had gone on to Google Brain. And we started building Uplimit really with this mission of how do we use AI to make it a lot easier to create and run truly world-class programs that deliver outcomes for learners.
That's great. So now I'm curious, what was the topic of that first class that your husband did?
The first class was so fun. It was a JavaScript class, and
Okay.
my husband at the time was an engineering leader at Apple, and so wasn't allowed to share that he was, doing, advertise that he was doing a class. And so I posted a cryptic message on Reddit and on Craigslist, and had this sort of eclectic set of students from all over the world that raised their hands, and they ended up spending about, it was a totally free class. They ended up spending about 12 hours a week working with us. We saw 80% completion for this totally, not required
Wow.
experience. And they found it pretty transformative. And a lot of what we were doing, I saw we could use AI and automation to do what we did, but in a way that would be easy. And that was really the start of what we were building.
So with Uplimit today, do you all who do you work with then? Is it like who's your audience? Is it a mix between those in higher ed or K through 12 corporate? Like what does that mix look like?
Yeah, it's almost all corporate today. So we work with some awesome companies like Databricks, who uses us to scale their customer education program, or Kraft Heinz, GE Healthcare, Procore has built a custom tech academy on our platform, and a number of others that are using us in the space. So mostly large companies looking to build out either customer education, leadership, onboarding, tech programs. Uh, that's who uses us today.
And I hope we're going to get into this, but I'm really curious about how do you keep things engaging and interactive. We don't have to do that now, but I hope we at some point talk about it, because that's, as you mentioned earlier, that's one of the big challenges with a lot of the material that's out
Mm-hmm.
there.
Yeah.
Really good, really smart content people, really poor interaction.
Yeah.
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 So let's keep that one going. Let's maybe jump to
That's a good
the
tease,
quick.
Dana.
Put
Yeah,
that
it's a
in the
good
file.
tease.
Yeah, let's
Put that
cut
in
to
the file.
commercial.
And then we're
Okay.
gonna start real quick because from the intro, Julia, you have a pretty impressive background, and it's really cool to see the mix between the tech, the education, and your experience, and then with an upstart with Uplimit and so forth. So it'd be great to hear that journey at a high level before we kind of jump into AI and the education stuff. Tell that story, but then also think of what was it like for you as a learner, and how are those kind of ebbs and flows between what were you trying to learn and even how it is right now running Uplimit. I'd be curious of how that learning journey is.
Yeah, yeah. So I began my career as a Teach for America teacher. I come from a family of educators. My grandmas were teachers, and my parents were academics. My brother's a professor. So I that was sort of the family business. And so I started as a fourth grade teacher in East San Jose, and I thought it was going to be sort of 2 years of hard duty, but it was going to be really meaningful. And I ended up actually just really loving it. And I found it to be so fun to think about ideas about how you reach students and how you move them forward, how you achieve goals collectively, how you inspire them. And so I did that for 2 years, ended up working for Teach for America, supervising teachers across the Bay Area, and then went to grad school at Stanford thinking that I wanted to be a superintendent for a large school district.
Mm.
Mm.
So wrote all of my essays about being a superintendent, and then got to Stanford, and I was doing a joint MBA and MA in education, and was learning about disruptive innovation and technological change, and just got super excited about what was possible, and how fast you could move within technology, and education, and the possibilities of how technology could be used to drive outcomes with learners. And so ended up going to Google, where I managed the Google Apps for Education team, was there for 2 years, really enjoyed it. And then was connected to one of the co-founders of Coursera, Daphne Kohler, right when the company was launching. It was about a month before the company launched, and just fell in love with the mission, and the vision around increasing access to education and really opening up these elite institutions very broadly. And so joined Coursera the month the company launched, when there was 10 people at the company, and was there for a little over 6 years. My last role there was starting and then scaling the enterprise business. And so from, advocating that we should have an enterprise business, that there's a big opportunity there, to when I left, we had about 1,300 or so customers. And then I went on to the investing side for a few years at GSV Ventures, which was really fun, looking at EdTech solutions. But then the pandemic happened, Zoom schools were in the news. There was this itch that I had to scratch, and I jumped headfirst into starting Uplimit.
I think I saw a post the other day. You mentioned how it's running a Upstart's really tough, really hard, but also rewarding at the same time. So from a learning side, what would you feel has been tough, and that what have you been learning throughout the process?
Yeah, well, I think the sort of commonality from a learning side across all those experiences was I was sort of thrown headfirst into a domain or a role that I had very little experience in, and had to figure out how to float very quickly. But in all of them, it was a very safe environment in order to go through that learning cycle quickly, in terms of trying things, failing, iterating, whether it was as a teacher where, delivering a lesson plan that like totally flops, or a new management strategy that like the kids do not respond to, or as a CEO, again, you're experimenting, you're trying things, you're figuring out the business model, and some things work, some things don't, but there's this sort of safety to be able to go through those cycles quickly. And then the other common element is just, I would say, like the social element to all of it is none of the experience. It was me alone trying to figure this stuff out. There was always a sort of team of people, or, in Teacher America, a cohort of peers that were, along that journey with me and in figuring this out.
I remember I think of that social element, and also having really good teachers along the way. And Day and I always think of this story with you, because I've actually shared it when I facilitated and talked about what it means to be an effective teacher and so forth.
Yeah.
So I always share the example of how you are an expert scaffolder, like that you're really good at scaffolding. And I told the story of me trying to get better at public speaking, and how you built me up to, presenting in front of 40 people, 50 people, doing webinars and so forth. And then you threw me into a 500 person room.
Yep.
And then I freaked out. I was a little anxious, really anxious.
You were bouncing all around the room.
And then
it was like you're the Energizer Bunny.
And then at the very end, I think you came up to me after, and your reaction was, you were pretty nervous, weren't you? And then I'm like, yeah, I was. But that's an example of how I feel like with that safe space, having people around that gives you the chance to fail, chance to learn, but immediate feedback. That would be like my example.
And now you don't have a problem standing in front of several hundred people.
Most time I don't. No, yeah. I mean, if I feel much better, than before. That was just terrifying at that moment. But
wow,
now I'm better. Yeah,
I could tell, but I didn't want to overreact.
The
anyway,
teacher side, right, of being that coach guide.
Yeah.
That can be
but
stressful.
I think it's super critical, and we talk about that all the time, on this show and past about I know we've talked about failure. We've had an episode about failure before. We've talked about the apprenticeship. We talked about having those leaders with you, so it's really effective.
Yeah, and it doesn't just happen. Like my manager at Coursera, this woman Lila Ibrahim, who's now the CEO of DeepMind, and is just incredible. She explicitly created that space that sort of allowed it. So I think it's the role of the leader in creating the space for learning is so important.
All right, so can I reach back on the shelf and pull my question back?
Yeah, I was just going to suggest
All right.
that. That's great.
So how do you keep it interactive? I mean, we've talked about this. You get some great content, but it's real easy to lose, especially when you're doing it over technology. It's real easy to lose the attention of the audience. Because
Yeah.
it's so easy to, turn off your video and start playing with your phone or whatever it might be.
Yeah.
So how do you do it? What's the magic?
Yeah, yeah. So there's no silver bullet, but there's a bunch of different levers that we can pull that make a big difference. And so, concretely, what we like, the adult learner, we assume, yeah, they maybe have a family, they have a job, which is always going to take priority over their learning,
Hmm.
and they have a lot of things going on. It is so easy for learning to be deprioritized because it is not inherently sort of not urgent. Like they care about it, they want to learn those skills, they want to move to the next rung in their career, they might even make the connection between those skills and where they want to go in their job, but it lacks the urgency.
Yeah.
And so it gets moved down the to-do list every day, and it keeps getting moved on the to-do list. And so then for us, it was have a question of how do we take something like that and make it so there's more urgency to it, more accountability. And so there's a couple things we did. We built out this whole sort of nudging system
Hmm.
that allows, on the back end, it's a lot of technology. On the front end, it's still a human that nudges learners at the exact right time to give them the support that they need to sort of continue on with the program. And so there is a deadline that maybe something is due, a project is due, a reflection is due, which also is another thing. Deadlines, people say that they don't like them, but they work. And they really are helpful for people, for managing people's time and managing them towards something that they actually do want to do, which is learning. And so there's a deadline, students are working towards that deadline, and then they receive a nudge that's a really friendly, helpful reminder. If they missed a lecture, it's a don't worry, here's a recording right here in the link, making it super easy. If they miss the assignment, it's a nudge saying, hi, Bob, I noticed you didn't complete the assignment. Here it is. And it's again from a human, and it's showing up probably in your Slack message or your Teams account. And it's reminding people of exactly what they need and providing that little push that increases the urgency of it. So that was probably like one of the biggest things is making that easy. And we started doing it manually. Then we built about a bunch of automation. And now what our system is, we use AI to analyze the data. We create subsets of learners based on that data using the AI. So the AI is doing it for you. It's teeing up the subset of learners and then using AI to draft the message for you of what should sent to your Slack account or your Teams account. And then the human's still in the loop, and the program manager still presses send today. But all of the work is all of the sort of legwork associated with it is being done by AI. And then we're taking that further because what we're seeing is most program managers are just accepting the messages. And so in Q1, companies are going to have the option for that to happen totally autonomously, where the decision of who to nudge, when to nudge, how to nudge, what message is happening with the AI, and the program manager can still have visibility into it, but it will happen autonomously. And you can think about how detailed and granular you can start getting when it is being run by AI, where we might notice that, Jake, like you dropped off in the middle of an assignment, and we know that that's a hard assignment and that you need a hint in order to be able to get pulled back in. Or we know that there's, getting a message at a certain time makes a difference, or getting an email instead of a nudge makes a difference. And the system can start doing that. So that's one example of sort of nudging and kind of our progression on it, but it really makes a big difference. And I can share some of the other examples, but that's been one of the big ones.
Well, it's interesting. It makes me think the more easy we make it, the more tempting it's going to be to overuse it. And,
Mm,
nudging becomes nagging.
mm,
And having, just kind of gone through a couple of months where I was
yeah,
getting 4 or 5 text messages from Kamala Harris and Tim Walz every day, which I'm sure that actually Saturday Night Live did a sketch on that, right?
They did.
She was typing
I'm
it.
texting
You
millions of people.
actually send those? It's been the butt of humor. It is how do you make sure that it's not so easy that manager could just say, okay, yeah, okay, yeah, okay, yeah, and
yeah,
then
yeah,
and then
yeah,
you wind up
yeah.
having a negative effect.
No, totally. So, like when we were running our own courses, the metric that we use to counteract over nudging.
Yeah,
Was satisfaction or MPS. And at a certain
for
point, if you
sure.
nudge too much, you sort of you lose on that one. But I also would say it's not just nudging. It's also like, how do you make the experience itself one that is interactive and engaging, especially for adult learners who, they want to be doing. They don't want to spend all their time watching videos. They want to implement it. And so when I worked for Teach for America supervising teachers, we use the Kolb's experiential learning model where you're learning something, you're applying it, you're reflecting on it, you're learning again. And so we think about how you build that into tech or a tech platform. So if you're learning about feedback, you might read a little bit or watch a short video, but then very quickly you're doing an AI role play where you're
Yeah.
having conversations with AI that's voice to voice, and you get customized, personalized feedback immediately on how you did in that conversation and what you need to improve and how you can get better. And then maybe you submit a reflection on an actual conversation that you had with somebody where you're actually delivering that feedback and you're getting peer feedback on that, and maybe AI feedback as well. So it's the nagging kind of, or not nagging, nudging.
Yeah, nudging. Sorry, I put that in your head. Now I apologize. Okay,
uh,
nudge,
you know,
nudge, 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 nudge. Okay, yeah,
keeps things going, but it has to be on the core of a really great learner experience. And that's where, like, we've designed a platform that is much more focused on active learning, where it's focused on doing, where you're not spending all your time watching videos or reading something. It's really trying to get you in there and having that experience. So we were talking about in the very beginning where you're trying something, you're failing, and then you have lots of support systems to help you figure it out and try again and ultimately succeed.
And that's what I think is important. Is this the last thing you just said is support systems. So whether or not that comes from from an AI tutor, or even the admin behind it, where it's able to provide more effective, use the data to provide better recommendations for you, or provide that nudge when it's more useful, or if you have real humans in there as well. So I think sometimes, if I know Bob and Dana, can I think of multiple times in the past where we've done courses or some type of curriculum, more on your own, and you get to you're really into it right away, and then it could really fail off pretty quickly because you pretty much feel like you're on an island.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things I think is really hard and difficult, especially as an adult learner, when you have so many other things that are just happening outside of your world.
Are you finding that there are certain topics or certain content domains that people kind of reach almost a precipice and they're like, I just don't get it after this. And then you have to do extra nudging or put in some other type of intervention to get them going, or does your system kind of equalize a lot of that?
That's a good question.
I guess what
We
I'm thinking about, Julie, is I'm thinking about learning a language, right? Because there's
Yeah.
sometimes where, you can learn the alphabet and you can learn some basic sounds, and maybe you can start to string together words, but then you start to get into conjugation, which is really tough, and sentence structure. I'm sure not doing that type of language, but um, at some point, learners in certain content domains need something extra, some extra support to get them to
Yeah.
continue.
So I think that's what's exciting about this moment right now with
Yeah.
AI and learning is, I think the ceiling on what that looks like is much higher than what we previously believed, where, it's the types of experiences that you can have, directly with AI, and the type of support that you can get from AI. In some, there's ways in which it could actually be better than what you might get from a human tutor, or different than what you would get from a human tutor. And so I think that's really exciting. There was a study that I saw that came out or a few weeks ago coming out of Harvard, which was looking at students in a science class. And it was an interactive science class, so like hands-on learning science class. And then students who had a well-prompted AI tutor. And what they found, and so an AI tutor that sort of knew about pedagogy and knew best practices and knew not to tell people the answer right away. And they gave sort of pre-test and a post-test with these students. And what they found was that the learners who engage with the AI tutor actually had learned twice as much as the learners who were in the course, and they
Hmm.
learned it in less amount of time. And so
Interesting.
I think I think the bounds of this are, I think they're very high in terms
Yeah.
of from a pure skills perspective, which isn't the only thing you get from a learning experience.
Right.
But from a pure skills perspective, I think what you can accomplish with AI is I don't think we've discovered the limits of it yet.
I would love to see that study if you don't
Yeah,
mind passing it along. That would be great. Because
yeah,
I mean, it's basically we've got the theory that Bloom's two sigma problem, right? Like I think he
yeah,
spent the last part of his life trying to figure out how do I make classroom
yeah.
training better. We've been saying that we can solve the problem not by trying to make classroom better, but by scaling tutors, and we can
Yeah.
do that with AI. So it sounds like that study is proving out that thesis.
I think that's true. I think the part that the studies miss, especially when they
Yeah,
happen in academic context versus adult learners, is some of these motivational elements
yeah,
where it's that doesn't answer yet the question of how do you drive urgency around learning and things like that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so but from a pure sort of skill acquisition standpoint, I think we're I think I think we're there or very close to being there.
It's a really great point because even there's the urgency to develop that skill, but
Mhm.
there's also in the work context you have urgency to still do your job.
Mhm.
So then,
Hopefully those are related.
well, I hope I hope so. I hope so. But at the same time, this goes back to the very beginning of the conversation where we now have multiple things around us that is requiring us our energy, our mental energy, everything else. Um, I always love the term body budget. If you've ever read Lisa Feldman Barrett, she uses the term body budget to think about what your brain's constantly doing is to budget specific elements of your energy so that way you can do certain cognitive tasks. But like when you put it in the work context, it's extremely, now you're adding another layer.
Yeah.
And so I would like to see more studies there, and it might be a thing for listeners, whoever, to start thinking about what is it like in your own context as well.
Yeah. Yeah. And what does that mean from a learning design perspective? Like if we, given that, so if we like sort of take that as a given and we're not confined to have people in traditional classrooms, what does that mean? Where should learning happen? Like how much learning should happen at a given point in time? And yeah, I think all of those questions are sort of on the table. I think things that we're thinking a lot about is how do we tie our experience more to actual business outcomes or performance metrics? Like, could we tie into existing data sources that would be more indicative of whether programs work? We're also thinking a lot about like when should a learner take a program or and what size of program could they take? And there's a company who we're working with right now that's redesigning their leadership program, and they're moving it into these like one, instead of having a big long 6-week leadership program, they're moving it into these like week-long modules, or and every quarter having a sort of set of them that people are going to be fed into based on what their needs are in a given quarter. And yeah, I think I think we can really start thinking about this problem differently, that are much more aligned to the learner needs and the business outcomes, and we can have systems that connect to each other in interesting ways.
Mm-hmm.
yeah. Hyper personalization is a thing. Will be a thing.
Mm-hmm.
That's great.
So if you could put yourself ahead 5 years, where
Yeah.
do you see learning? I mean, what's the trajectory for where we're heading?
I think I think the core learning programs are going to be tied to like data points on the business side in ways that start showing the correlation between doing different programs and the business outcomes. And
Yep.
there's lots of different variables that impact those metrics, but I think you can start seeing strong correlations as these systems get tied together. And I think that's going to be really important. So you don't have to believe, you can actually like see it,
Prove.
like
Yeah.
Yeah,
This is
yeah,
important. Like, believe me. Like, instead, like, no, this is really important. Look at the impact that these leadership programs have on these core metrics that we care about as a company, around retention, around around satisfaction in the pulse survey, around, you know, whatever the metrics are. And I think that'll be easy to do. I think I think learning will be hyper personalized. Like, I think, and I actually think, like, that's sort of beginning to be here today, where you're
Yeah.
having a feedback conversation and you're with the AI and you're getting very personalized feedback. And there's other types of building blocks, we think of them, that we're building, like where you can submit an open-ended assignment and get feedback based on the instructional designer's rubric with AI, or you submit a video of you doing a pitch and you can get AI feedback. So very personalized learning experiences, I think, are going to also become the norm. Um, uh, yeah, and then having it be more tied to the learner's work journey. So
Mhm.
thinking about when they should learn what, and how that gets triggered, I think is something that is super interesting.
Great.
Is there anything of that 5 years that concerns you? Are you
Um,
worried about?
yes, yeah. Well, there's things that I worry about. Is that I worry about lots of things.
She's a CEO, Jake. I mean, come on.
Yeah, this is true. Yeah.
My worry list is very long. The question is, which of my worry lists do I worry about at a given point of time? But
maybe
I
AI could help you with
Yeah, there
figuring
you
out
go.
how to prioritize your worry
maybe,
list.
yes, yes, yeah, or nudge me to worry about the right
Right.
thing.
Right, right, yeah, exactly.
Um, but I think there's sort of two things when I think about AI more broadly in the learning context that I worry about. One is that I do think the labor market is going to change pretty significantly because of AI. I just look at the capabilities, even within the learning space, on like content creation, and jobs are going to change. And so how quickly can the labor market adjust? Like, I have no doubt that we will come up with new jobs for people to do,
Mhm.
but like, how quickly can the labor market adjust? How quickly will those jobs be created? Like, that is a worry. And then a second worry that I have is, you know, I think the AI tutor is going to be very good at tutoring. But what do we lose as you move the experience to that?
Yeah.
Like, you know, imagining um, a university classroom that is empty and everybody's at their, you know, in their dorm room with an AI tutor. Like, I don't think that's where we as a society want to go. And I think there would be real implications of the loss of human connection, which is this amazing byproduct of most learning experiences. So I worry about that. Like, we already have a loneliness epidemic. Like, you know, education is one of the places where, both in corporate and in, you know, higher education, where people are able to connect and build meaningful relationships that are powerful beyond just the skills that you acquire during that period. So I also worry about that.
Those are
No
really good
easy
ones.
answers.
Yeah.
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 Really good ones. Very, very fascinating. Very, very interesting and great discussion, Julia. And again, thanks for joining the show today.
Yeah,
But
thanks for
before we
being here.
go, how do people find you outside in the webosphere, we would call it?
Yes. LinkedIn is probably, I'm on Twitter very rarely, but I am on there. But Julia Stiglitz, there aren't that many Julia Stiglitzes, I've learned. So yeah, if you just look up Julia Stiglitz on LinkedIn, I am there.
Well, thanks for spending the time with us. It was great to get to know you. Jake and Dana, as always, thanks for being here. To our listeners, thank you for being here and geeking out with us. And we'll see you on the next episode of The Learning Geeks, which will come out very, very soon, as soon as Jake edits. As soon as Jake edits it. Okay, let's tie
All
it
right.
off.
Yeah,
I'm about to go on
bye.
vacation. Bye,
Yes.
everybody.
See ya.